Everybody. I want to spend some time walking through just exactly what it takes to hack wireless networks. I'm also going to be posting another video that kind of describes wireless network basics if you need a refresher on some of those. Uh, Briefly, though, understand that you've got to have the right hardware and software for wireless networks to function. Um, Essentially the technology that's allowing those signals to travel through the air as opposed to wired networks. Now, wireless in general is used all over the place, whether it's GPS, baby monitors, cordless phones, if someone still has a landline, uh, RF based remote controls for TVs, garage door openers, and Bluetooth. And so they're all sharing one large frequency spectrum, everything from AM and FM radio down at the bottom over on the left, as you can see, into things like GPS in the 1000 to 1600 megahertz, and then even microwaves, which sit right next to Wi-Fi and cordless phones. And we even see today that we've got 5 gigahertz wireless networks as well. But know that all this is being shared, and the FCC or Federal Communication Commission dictates what devices can use which frequency spectrum for their usage. So you got to have a wireless network interface card. Some of those have visible antennas, some of them are just internal antennas, and you got to have access points, right? So this helps us bridge between the wired and the wireless networks. Eventually there have to be wires somewhere, right? And then we've got our wireless networking protocols as well on how that data is going to be transmitted. Those access points have radio transceivers, and that helps connect us to the network via the Ethernet cable, right? So again, that bridge. Just a few images of commercial grade access points, except for this one down the bottom left, which is more of a home version router access point switch all in one device. You can see these are a little more ruggedized for outdoor use. These are like the enterprise ones that you see on Milliken's campus. And this includes an image with the controller appliance that would sit back in a data center or networking closet to actually manage, hundreds of access points in one interface as opposed to logging into each one individually. Now, there's some utilities out there you can use to see what networks are available. This is using a utility called VI Stumbler that is free to download for Windows. The link is in the slide deck on Moodle that you can click on, or you can just Google for it and go download it and play with it. It's a good tool that will help you identify the wireless networks that can be discovered with your wireless NIC. It'll also show you the authentication mechanism, whether it's open, WPA, et cetera, encryption level, and signal strength. So that's helpful. Also give you the MAC address. So that can be convenient too if you're trying to locate specific MAC addresses or even do some MAC address filtering. So we know that the SSID is typically what we call as the Wi-Fi network name that you would see, that you would configure when you bring an access point online. For those that are even more secure, they might even hide that SSID so it's not being broadcast to the world to see. If that were the case, then it would not show up on something like VI Stumbler. You would have to know Go Colts Air and other in order to connect to that access point. And we can see these, at least a few of them that show up in Windows when we try to connect. That VI Stumbler gives you a much more comprehensive list. When I took this screenshot a while ago, these were all of the Wi-Fi networks that just showed up in my neighborhood. So they're broadcasting all over the place, and these are from 4 houses down, I'm assuming. Vendors have default values. You gotta configure those so they're not using the default SSID. I keep backing up, but I just shiver whenever I see things like Netgear 80, meaning somebody hasn't reconfigured the default, or something like home underscore 26CF has likely not been reconfigured from the default. In fact, you can see that that's a Cisco one. That home 2C6F is likely a Cisco device, right? And we know Netgear was Netgear something, right? So those all match up with default values that should have been changed. So one of the things you can do, and you can do this in your own time, and you've been out to the National Vulnerability Database several times already, is go out and pick an access point brand like D-Link or Netgear or Cisco, and go look for those vulnerabilities, look for those exploits or attack demonstrations. Think about what solutions you might offer for some of those vulnerabilities. Might be as easy as just running an update on the firmware on the device, or it may take something more involved where you have to put some other either technical controls or administrative controls in place to uh, reduce the risk of that vulnerability being exploited. So we've kind of talked about this already. This gives you an interface for DDWRT. This is a customized firmware that's compatible with certain access point vendors and models. You can go do some research on DDWRT. It provides you, it's essentially open source operating system for routers, for home routers, and allows you to configure some advanced options that you wouldn't have had available on your stock version from a Netgear or a D-Link or whomever. Things like persistent VPN connections, dynamic DNS, those types of things. It's something I've always wanted to play with. I just haven't gotten there yet. My DDWRT isn't compatible with my Netgear router that I have here at home. So a couple other things to understand before we think about actually hacking wireless networks are the types of authentication mechanisms that can be used. Clearly, there are open networks all over the place that use open system authentication. These are the ones that you'll find most likely in Starbucks and McDonald's and guest Wi-Fi networks and hotels, where it's essentially just a three-way handshake. Laptop says, "Hey, I want to connect to you, access point." Access point says, "Yeah, sure, go ahead and connect to me." And then laptop initiates a connection with no challenge, passphrase, or anything else. So within that 802.1x standard, we can use some different concepts for connecting using things like EAP, WEP, WPA, and Wi-Fi protected setup. Some of these authentication methods, especially like EAP, which is an extension to what Millikan uses, actually has a SSL certificate that helps encrypt that information and verifies the access point. And often that gets either downloaded as part of the Wi-Fi config or is already sitting it's using a public certificate that's already part of the root pre-installed with the operating system. So it would look like this in a Windows environment, seeing the valid certificate that's there. So there are some other pieces that go along with this. If you're using EAP, you can also improve that even further with using Microsoft's PEEP, which is kind of the certificate extension version that Millikan uses. So the Microsoft PEEP is combined with an authentication server. So this is why when you log on to your ResNet, you've got to enter in your username and password, and that connects up to what's called a Radius server that connects to the Microsoft Active Directory database of usernames and passwords to verify credentials. So that's kind of a pictorial of what that looks like. WEP, or wired equivalent privacy, is certainly a standard for encryption, but a very weak standard for encryption that is easily hackable. And hopefully through the lab, even if you want to, you can maybe reconfigure your own wireless network to WEP and see just how easy it is to crack into. But it is encrypted and secured nonetheless, although very susceptible to hacking. Today, most levels of encryption for Wi-Fi use WPA or WPA2. That uses, for the WPA2, uses that pre-shared key with a longer password to be able to verify, authenticate, and then encrypt the packages. Um, and has been a really good replacement for WEP. Um, Wi-Fi protected setup is, you typically see these on routers that have buttons that enable almost pairing like Bluetooth. You could also see this in like HP printers and other peripherals like that that are using WPS, where it's really awkward to have to enter in a password. You could also maybe use this for gaming systems and those types of things. So I know you're not on campus right now, or likely not on campus. But if you're not doing this for Millikan, for the MU ResNet Wi-Fi network, use something like VI Stumbler or another tool, and see if you can figure out what wireless standards being used on your home network, or another network. See what security methodologies in place and what shortcomings there might be. A popular method for hacking wireless is doing something called war driving. You essentially drive around and you have a more high-powered wireless NIC, and you try to detect unsecured access points that you could then hop onto and then see what resources you can have access to. So no different than seeing what ports are open. You're looking to see what networks are open that you can attach yourself to, and then see if there are any nodes on that network that that have resources that are available for you to access. So war driving itself is not illegal, but using the network resources and actually accessing them would be illegal. So no different than port scanning. It looks awful weird trying to see if doors are unlocked. It looks very questionable, but you haven't broken in yet, right? What's now being popularized, rather than driving around neighborhoods or office buildings, is doing the same thing, only using drones instead. So clearly that the miniaturization of that technology has allowed us to do this. Here's just a picture of someone set up in their car with some tools installed, trying to do that and find wireless networks. The software to use is actually things like VI Stumbler, also one you'll use in the lab for this week, called AirCrack NG. It's going to identify the SSID, the security type, the signal strength, and then allow you to dig in with that MAC address and then start to try to hop on. This is a specialized antenna used for Kali and any computer, really. It's got an external antenna, so you got better range. Typically, they're all under the company that makes them is called Alpha, ALFA. They are not very expensive. I think you can pick one of these up for 30 or 35 bucks and plug it in, use it as your NIC, and use it to start monitoring networks. Talked about VI Stumbler a little bit already. I haven't gotten this piece to work yet, but you're supposed to be able to interface this with GPS. So I don't have a GPS chip in my laptop. If I did, then I could probably do some location tracking as well. This can be a helpful tool even in a company perspective if you're trying to detect individuals who are plugging in unauthorized access points. So that's an issue that companies could have, a vulnerability where an individual could plug in an unauthorized out-of-the-box access point, leave it open authentication, and then send a buddy through the parking lot to then be able to connect to the corporate network. So it can be a way to circumvent security. Some advanced access points, like those Cisco ones, will actually go out and essentially denial of service attacks on those unauthorized or rogue access points to try to shut them down. So just some screenshots here of a VI Stumbler. It'll do the logging as well. Um, if you get some really good antennas, you can get some really good range to try to attack. You probably need to be plugged into a power source to get that. Another tool that's out there is something called Kismet. It'll run on Linux, etc. You could try to download this and install it on your Kali box. It's also an intrusion detection system and can sniff out wireless traffic. Also works in conjunction with Wireshark and some other programs like AirCrack, which I mentioned, and something else called AirSnort, which the base version of that snort is also an intrusion detection system and a tool that you could use. So you can detect hidden network SSIDs, so ones that aren't being broadcast. You actually do graphical mapping. You'd actually set up like a client server type architecture and supports several different wireless NIC types. It can provide that output in a log form that's in XML, so you could use it and load it into a database very easily. Here's a video. So if you go pull up I'm not going to play this here during this recording, but you can go check out this video and the slide deck that's in Moodle to play this and actually see how Kismet works. The technique for wireless hacking isn't that much different from a wired network. You're still port scanning. You're still enumerating all of those IP address and ports and all those pieces. The different, think of it as network discovery, only you're network discovering Wi-Fi networks as opposed to network discovering connected devices to a network like their IP address and MAC address. So today you should be able to use AirCrack NG in your Raspberry Pi Kali setup. They're one that you don't have access to right now, but you could go acquire is something called a Wi-Fi Pineapple. That is more of a specific appliance to do those things. You can just kind of plug in and start using. So this is another tool called FEM Wi-Fi Cracker. It's something that you could, it might be pre-installed with Kali, or you could go out and grab it because it works in Linux as well. The Wi-Fi Pineapple is meant for, it's a device you'd have to go out and purchase. So think of your AirCrack software, only this is all built into one appliance or device. You could plug into your network to audit wireless in your organization. Actually do, from a hacking perspective, you could do man in the middle and try to intercept Wi-Fi traffic and then obtain the data being transferred and then pass it on or manipulate it. Also identify rogue access points or unauthorized access points. So definitely more advanced. This is not something I've had a chance to play with yet. These are definitely a little bit more expensive. So other things that you can use to counteract people invoking wireless attacks on your corporate network is actually spinning up fake access points to get people to attach to, and then you capture their information when they do that. The other piece that I've mentioned before is use what are called honeypots, and those are essentially unsecured devices out there, and then you log who connects so you can track them down and block them. If you really want to secure and make sure your radio waves are not leaving or coming into a building, you can get special paint to put on walls that will essentially block the signal. So that's one mechanism. You can also, if you've got the right type of access points, you can scale back the gain on the antenna so you're not emitting as much power, which means you're going to have a limited range. So that's one way. We did a IT audit project years ago in a different security class where they were evaluating the wireless in a local church, and I had them actually go around the outside of the church and in the parking lot to see if the wireless was accessible from out there. Because if you got bleed over outside the building, that's a whole lot easier for people to find and connect to than physically having to be inside the building. You can also use firewalls and routers and make sure that the only people allowed on your wireless network have authorized MAC addresses. So making sure that they register their device before they get on the network. And some companies provide automated sites and processes for doing these things. Authentication, like Milliken does, you got to have a Milliken account in order to connect, is one way to um, verify who's on your wireless network. Enhancing security with things like EAP and certificates. Also firewalling off the wireless traffic, especially guest access from your corporate network. So using things like like VLANs or virtual LANs, and segmenting your network so that you separate that wireless data from the wired data, and even corporate wireless data from guest wireless data. You can also assign static IP addresses. That's really an administrative nightmare. I know the book mentions it. I'm not a big fan of static IP addresses unless they're servers. Um, you can do things like disable the Wi-Fi protected setup. So you don't have people just going around and pushing buttons on things like printers and routers and able to connect to them. And definitely change the default SSID regardless. You can disable the SSID broadcasts, although that makes it difficult for people to connect. So use that as you think it applies to your specific use case. So that gives you an idea of wireless network hacking. I encourage you to go check out these slides and the videos here. And then look for the fun lab that is to come for next week.